Okay, welcome back, everybody. Welcome to Lydia. That's nice to see you. Okay, so those of you that were here last week,
you want to share the screen?
Not yet. I gave you some homework. Who remembers what the homework was?
To look at verse 31, Shmuel Aleph, and then to look at verse 5, I think it was, of Shmuel Bet, and to say what did you say? It's one of those
compare and contrast.
Yes, compare and contrast was probably right, but you actually said it like an exam question.
Yeah, compare and contrast. Chapter 31 of Shmuel Aleph, correct, Leslie, well done. With verse 6 onwards of chapter 1 of Shmuel Bet. That was the homework. And because both of these things describe the death of Shaul. But they are different, aren't they? So, since Leslie was the only one that remembered what the homework was, I'm assuming that he's the only one that actually did it. Come on, Leslie.
Also remembered.
Oh, you also remembered. But no. Did you do it, Paul?
Barbara did.
I looked, but I was struggling, I have to tell you. I was struggling, all right. But I tried.
The only thing I could see was that obviously David was querying with this man the fact that Saul and his son had died. But the reason I thought was because David seemed to have a lot of connections around the country. And consequently, I would assume he would have thought that if Saul had died and his son, I would have heard about this from someone in the areas that I obviously know people, and I've never heard of this. So I'm concerned, and I'm not sure I can believe it. That's the take I took.
Okay, I think that's right. I do think that David did think, I'm not sure I believe him. And then we'll see later on in verse 13, which I'll just put on the screen now. We will see in verse 13, he says to him, where are you? From where are you? He starts to question him again. And then he says, I'm the son of an Amnalekite stranger. So, yeah, I think that's right. Let's have a look. Okay, Barbara, did you find any compare and contrast between the two stories?
Well, he was supposed to have fallen on his sword, and he didn't imply by Amnalekite he hadn't done that.
Okay, that's a very big difference, isn't it? Anything else you noticed?
I'm afraid not. I was unsuccessful.
He asked the Amnalekite. He said the Amnalekite that he asked him to put him to death, where he was supposed to be his sword bearer who's supposed to put him in the yard.
Okay, that's another significant difference. These are all important differences that Paul is pointing out. Let's go through all the differences that we can see, and see what we make of them. Let's just remind ourselves what we're actually talking about here. Chapter 31 of Shmuel Aleph, which is there on the screen for you, is the author's description of what went on, and the author's description of the death of Saul. And he said, the battle fell. Oh, let's get Jeffrey to do some work. Jeffrey,
yeah.
We've gone backwards into Shmuel Aleph.
Yeah.
It's on the screen. You can read it either from the screen or your book if you like. Chapter 31 of Shmuel Aleph, verse 3 onwards.
The battle then concentrated against Saul. The archers, the men with bows, found him, and Saul was terrified of the archers. Saul said to his armor-bearer, "Draw your sword and stab me with it, lest these uncircumcised people come and stab me and make sport of me." But his armor-bearer did not consent, for he was very frightened. So Saul took the sword himself and fell upon it. When the armor-bearer saw that Saul was dying, he also fell upon his sword to die with him.
Okay, stop there. Stop there. stop there. Right, so that's the author's description of what happened. Now let's go to Shmuel Bet chapter 1 and read for us, Jeffrey, from verse 5 onwards.
I'm not quite sure where.
Shmuel Bet.
Shmuel Bet. From verse 5.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry, I didn't catch it. It's cut out. Say again.
Chapter 1, verse 5.
Chapter 4, verse 5.
Chapter 1.
No, I can't hear. It's gone fuzzy.
Your sound is gone a little bit.
Jeffrey, it's
You
chapter
said
1.
verse 5.
Chapter
Verse
1,
5.
verse 5.
Can you hear me yet?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
you're
can
clear
hear you,
now.
but I can't. Oh, right, I've got it. Okay. Got David. David. David then said to the young man who was telling him, "How do you know that Saul and Jonathan, his son, died?" The young man who was telling him said, "I happened to be at Mount Gilboa, and Saul was leaning on his spear. And behold, the chariots and cavalry were overtaking him. He turned around and saw me. He called out to me, and I answered, 'Here I am.' He asked me, 'Who are you?' And I told him, I am an Amalekite. Then he said, 'Stand up over me and put an end to my life, for the throes of death have gripped me while my soul is still within me.' So I stood over him and ended his life, for I knew that he would not survive after he had fallen on his sword. I then took the crown that was on his head and the bracelet that was on his arm and brought them here to my lord."
Okay, stop there. Okay, so that's the Amalekites' version of what happened. So there's a lot of differences there. Let's start at the top and work our way through the differences. The first difference is over here, verse 6. Saul was leaning on his spear. And what did we have in chapter 31?
Sword.
Sword, that's right. Saul fell upon his sword. Where is that? Saul took the sword and fell upon it. So that's the first difference. Chapter 31, the author of Shmuel Aleph tells us that Shaul fell on his sword. The lad says he was leaning on his spear. Okay, that's difference number one. Difference number two. In Shmuel Aleph, who was it that was catching up with Shaul? The archers. The archers. Okay. And who was it in the story of the lad?
Chariots.
The chariots and the leaders of the cavalry. Okay, so that's two differences for a kickoff. Now you could say,
Johnny,
well,
Johnny, I have a question.
Go on.
Is it possible, forensically speaking, it's very, very difficult to fall on your sword, or even worse, even more difficult, to impale yourself upon your own spear. Forensically speaking, it's a very difficult thing. Is it possible that this guy, this Amalekite, might have actually killed King Saul and then made up this story?
If we had only Shmuel Bet chapter 1 to rely on, then I would agree that that was a very strong possibility. But we have chapter 31 of Shmuel Aleph, which tells us by a third party, in other words, by the author of Shmuel Aleph, whoever that was,
Yeah.
That this is described as fact. I agree that if I was David, and I'm going to come to this later on in the show, I'm going to, in a way, come around to that sort of question later on. If you're only hearing it from the Amalekite, you may well think that this was a made-up story, but I think we have to dismiss that possibility. We have to dismiss that possibility because we've got an independent version of it in chapter 31, albeit with some differences. But it seems from chapter 31 of Shmuel Aleph that he did fall on something. So it's a good question, and we'll come back to discuss it a little bit more later on. So the next thing is the chariots and the cavalry rather than the archers. What's the difference between cavalry and archers?
Cavalry is mounted. Soldiers. Cavalry is like armor today, and archers is like artillery. You could compare them today to that.
Okay, and so what's the implication there?
Cavalry is stronger.
Cavalry's
no. Yeah. Cavalry always needs the support of infantry and vice versa.
Okay, let's talk about distance.
Proximity.
Yes, proximity. You're right, Jeffrey. Proximity. That's exactly what I was talking about. I was thinking about. And the archers, by definition, will be further away from Shaul because they are shooting their bows. They're like the snipers, aren't they? From a kilometer away or what have you. The foot soldiers, the cavalry, are likely to be up close and personal, and so there's a difference there. So I'll come to you in a sec, Hannah. I can see you've got your hand up. So what do we learn or take or understand, if anything, from those first two differences? The spear versus the sword, and the cavalry versus the archers. Is there any significance to that? Yes, Jeffrey.
Yeah, well, Saul was terrified of both of them.
Okay, so we don't draw too much of a conclusion.
His mindset was suicide.
Okay, so we don't draw too much of a conclusion between the cavalry and the archers. Could be true that the archers. That he was frightened of the archers and the cavalry caught up with him. Could be both is true. All right. What about the sword and the spear? Any significance to that difference, do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I think that.
Well, first of all, Philip, which one's correct? Spear or sword?
I think sword. Spear would be
sword.
It's very difficult. It's impossible to impale yourself upon a spear. It's too long.
So why did this lad say that it was a spear?
Maybe he was at a distance. Maybe he was at a distance and he didn't see properly.
But according to him, he wasn't at a distance, was he? He came and just killed him.
There's something wrong here, Johnny. I think.
Okay,
I mean,
good. Okay, that's the point I'm trying to make. That there is something wrong here. Yes, Jeffrey.
Well, the history shows us that Saul was very fond of his spear. He never left the spear never left his side, and he was forever using it. And he threatened to pin David to the wall many times with his spear. So I think that was his preferred weapon.
Maybe the translation in English is wrong. If it would have been his javelin, which is a short version of a spear, it would have been much more possible for him to have done it on a javelin, and also it would even from a short distance it might have looked like a sword. You understand?
Right.
Maybe the English translation of chanit. What is it? Is it chanit?
Yeah, chanit. Yeah. Okay, that's a fair comment.
Of chanit is wrong. It's not spear, it's javelin.
That's a fair comment. It may well be a short spear, and it may have looked like a sword. I think that's a fair comment. But I think Jeffrey's comment is very apropos. That's what I was thinking, Jeffrey. I'm coming to you in a sec, Hannah. I was thinking the same. Shaul's spear has got form, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Because he's tried to pin David to the wall twice with his spear. He missed, but he done it twice. He tried to do it with his spear. So David will not be all that looking kindly towards Shaul's spear. The whole concept of this youth here, what's his whole reason for coming to David?
He wants a reward.
He wants a reward. Yes, he wants a reward. He wants to rub David up the right way. He's brought in his crown and the bracelet. And part of this is invoking the spear. I think is part of this whole process. Let me just go to Hannah first, because she had her hand up for a while. Yes, Hannah.
I'm debating with myself about even saying, first of all, I remember I have an image of Hollywood movies with people in chariots and people standing on the chariot with bows and arrows. Also, you can fire Indians used to ride horses and fire arrows. So the archers could have been on the chariots, number one, possible.
Yeah, okay, I'll buy that.
And number two, it said he fell on his sword. And I'm wondering whether that's just an expression or whether he really did fall from an upright position, because he was already dying. He felt he was dying. And whether he may not have been already lying on the ground and taken his sword and stabbed himself. But I don't know if that's possible.
Wait a second. Hang on a sec, Jeff. Hang on. And Paul as well. We'll come back to you. I just want to deal with...
Can I say something,
hang on.
Johnny?
No, you can't.
You can't stab yourself with a sword. It's
wait.
practically impossible.
Right, I've muted him. Right, you have to wait your turn. I'm going to deal with Hannah's question first. I think we need to go back and look. You said to me that before he fell on his sword, he was dying. That's not true. That's not true.
Oh, okay.
True. Have a look at verse 3 on the screen.
Yeah.
He was frightened. He wasn't dying. He was frightened. And he said to his weapon bearer, kill me. I don't want them to come and kill me. So he wasn't dying at that point. He was dying, according to our chapter, he was dying when he said to the young lad, finish me off. That's true. But then he'd already fallen on his sword. But when he fell on his sword, and as for the second point, is it just an expression? Well, it's become an expression because of Shaul falling on his sword. It's the other way around. Okay, the expression comes from chapter 31 of Shmuel Aleph. Right, Paul first, and then Jeffrey, and then Philip. Right, Paul.
Two things. Firstly, it only says he was leaning on his spear. That might have been supporting him. Secondly, when translation was read to us before, in verse 10, I thought he said, I knew he wouldn't live after he's fallen on his sword. It's not in my translation, but I think that's what Jeffrey read. I might be wrong. I might have misheard you.
No, you are right. I noticed that as well. And I immediately looked over to the Hebrew to see whether it said that, and it doesn't. We'll come to it in a minute. That's a good observation, Paul. I saw the same thing. I also thought about the same thing about leaning on his spear. By the way, let's just have a look at the Hebrew of that. We're in verse 6. V'hinei Shaul nish'an al chanito. And behold, Shaul was nish'an. Where have you know that word from? Yes, Philip.
So Shir and Rabbi Dr. Lieberman, is giving on Shmuel.
Who knows where we get that word from, nish'an? You've said it this morning already. You've said it this morning. I'll give you a clue. I'll give you a clue. Jeff Kirsch Jeff Kirsch has said it twice this morning already. We've only said it once.
No, it's obviously in the Amida.
It's obviously in the Amida. Well done, Leslie. Good observation.
Well, got one on everyone.
Okay, so thank you very much. Mishan umiftach latzadikim.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Mishan umiftach. What does that mean? Mishan umiftach latzadikim. Mishan, you are a support.
Supported by.
Yeah, Mishan umiftach, and you are a promise to the tzaddikim. Yes, you are a support and a security for the tzaddikim. So Mishan means to support or to lean. If you lean on somebody, it's for support. So v'hinei Shaul nishan al chanito. He was leaning on his spear. Now I would agree with you, Paul. If we just had that pasuk, that doesn't say that he was mortally wounded by this leaning on his spear. He might have just been leaning up for a bit of a rest. But then he goes on to say in verse 9, doesn't he? He says, Ki achazani hashavetz. Now, our translation on the screen says, a shudder has seized me. But Jeffrey translated it differently from the Art Scroll. Jeffrey, read out verse 9 from the Art Scroll, please.
Are we where are we? Because I'm looking.
Shmuel Bet Chapter 1.
Okay, sorry. Okay. Then he said, "Stand up over me and put an end to my life, for the throes of death have gripped me, while my soul is still within me."
There we go. So he says, "This." What did it say? This grip of death or something? What did you say?
For the throes of death have
throes of death. The throes of death.
Steinsaltz says, "I'm seized with paralysis."
Okay, this is very interesting. Steinsaltz says seized with paralysis. Chabad says shudder. Art Scroll says the throes of death. I am looking at the Koren, and the Koren says.
Could it be seizures? Could it be seizures?
Wait a minute. The Koren says convulsions. So the only translation that actually specifically talks about a death, being close to death, is actually the Art Scroll. The other translations don't necessarily imply that he was close to death, which would support Philip's theory that the chap was actually making it all up, and it would also support Paul's question, which is, well, it only says he was leaning on his spear, doesn't say that he put him to death, that he'd already died, or he was dying. So that's interesting, isn't it? So there's another difference. Chapter 31 clearly says that he fell on his sword. Let's just have a look at the words just to actually see. Vayikach Shaul, it's on the screen for you. Vayikach Shaul et hacherev. Saul took the sword, vayipol aleha, and he fell on it. So there's no room for misunderstanding in chapter 31, but in Shmuel Bet Chapter 1, it's a little bit vague. So that's another difference.
How about Ralbag?
Okay, what does the Ralbag say?
Ralbag says that, yes, he first of all fell on his sword, but it didn't do enough. So then he said, okay, let me fall on the spear, which will really go through me, and that will be the end of me.
Okay, so the Ralbag has clearly got our problem, hasn't he? He's probably he's addressing our problem of the difference in, which is what we're doing at the moment. We're assessing the difference between the two stories. The Ralbag's approach is to try and what's the word? Try and make these two stories fit one another. I'm more in Philip's camp, actually. which is quite amazing in itself. But anyway, actually, I think that this Amalekite is not necessarily a reliable witness. And
Yeah.
Can I have another point of view then?
Yes,
Maybe
one sec, Michael. One sec, Michael. Come
Yeah.
to you in a sec. I'm of the opinion that chapter 31 is accurate because that's given us as a third-party viewing. And chapter 1 of Shmuel Bet, which is the Amalekite, is not to be relied on for accuracy. And the reason I think that is because he's trying to ingratiate. That's the word.
Your sound's gone again.
He's trying to ingratiate himself. Tell me where my sound is back, please, Michael. Okay, we can spend this in the wrong direction. We'll see how long it takes. It takes about 15 seconds before I can start talking again, rather than just talking rubbish, that just so that you can hear my voice.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're back. Okay. So what he was trying to do was ingratiate himself with David, and I don't think that he can necessarily be relied upon. The Ralbag clearly is trying to square the two stories one with another, and as if the sword didn't do it, so he had another go with the spear. Okay, who am I to argue with the Ralbag? But there you go. I've got Philip as a support for me. Yes, Michael Kraus.
Right. Well, I've got a slightly other view. Maybe in chapter 1 of Shmuel Aleph, we've got an art scroll situation where it's a whitewash, where they're trying to show Saul to be a really great guy, and he fell on his sword. He died a hero, so to speak. Whereas in Shmuel Bet, that's the truth. In fact, he wasn't a hero; he was a coward, and therefore he asked somebody to kill him rather than to get tortured by the opposition.
Okay, well, I mean, I think that you can. I mean, I think that's a question that's a fair question, because in some ways we raised it when we did 31, didn't we? In that all the way through Shmuel Aleph, apart from right at the beginning in chapter 9, come to you in a minute, Philip. Apart from the beginning in chapter 9, where we're told that Shaul was a good, tall, handsome, modest fellow, Shaul is not portrayed in Shmuel Aleph in a very positive light at all. And we've been through it in great detail, and the feeling that we've got, and I've said it sort of explicitly, is I can't understand why anybody would call their kid Shaul, because he does not come over as a very positive character at all. Right at the end, in chapter 31, it seems that the author has almost a bit of Rachmanis on him, and portrays him as that hero of going out knowing that he was going to lose his life, because in chapter 29, I think, the witch brings Shmuel, and Shmuel himself says, you're going to die tomorrow. And nevertheless, he goes out to battle. He knows he's going to die, and he dies the death of a hero. And so right at the end, I think Shmuel, the author of Shmuel Aleph, is giving Shaul a bit of credit for that last bit of bravery. But you could certainly interpret it the way you interpret it, Michael. And if we take Shmuel Bet at face value, and we say that the Amalekite lad is telling the truth, and he didn't fall on his spear, and he was just leaning on his spear, thinking about falling on his sword, and he didn't have the guts to do it, pardon the pun, he didn't have the guts to do it, then you could be right. You could be right that that's another indication. And maybe I've just thought of this, maybe that's another way he was trying to ingratiate himself with David, because David, or he will have known that David and Shaul were enemies, or at least from Shaul's perspective, they were enemies. And therefore, if you are denigrating somebody's enemy, you're going to please that other person, aren't you? If you say, you know, somebody that you're an enemy of is a no good, that's a good thing for him. So you could be right that the reason that the lad says that is not because it's necessarily true. It might have been true, but because he wants to impress David. So I think the point that you raise is an interesting one. But I think there is a difference between the author of Shmuel Aleph and the account given by the Amalekite lad, Philip, and then Jeffrey. Philip.
I tend to I'm sorry to say that I disagree a bit with Michael Kraft, because the thing is, there's two things here. Shaul was shirking responsibility, as many people and politicians did over history, because, as I say, history repeats itself. Shaul was a bit of a paranoid personality, and he could not take responsibility for seeing his army being defeated by the Philistines. And that's why he had the guts and the bravery to personally finish himself off. So he was, how should I say, a coward as far as his army went, but personally, he was very, very brave.
Okay, that's a fair point. Let's just discuss that point for a minute before we go to Jeffrey. This is why this is so interesting, because, you know, there's all different takes on it. I think that the author of Shmuel Aleph is trying to paint Shaul in a positive light at the end of his life.
Yeah.
I think your analysis is a fair analysis. You know, those people who get themselves into trouble for whatever reason and then commit suicide, rather than face the consequences. Are they brave? Are they cowards? Are they accepting that you know, that's their punishment, whatever it is? I don't know. Thank God I've never had such a dilemma. But I mean, I suppose it could be any of those things. Shaul could be saying, I'm responsible for all these people's deaths. I've failed my people. It is, you know, I'm going to fall on my sword. And in fact, one sec, Philip. In fact, today we often use that expression, falling on one's sword, in a sort of a positive way, don't we?
Yeah.
You know, you know, if forgive me, I'm not getting into politics here. I'm just using it as an example. If Bibi was to resign, right? If Bibi was to resign and say, the buck stops here, I take responsibility for what happened, and I'm going to resign, there would be people that would say that's the honourable thing to do. It was honourable thing to do, to resign, to fall upon your sword, as it were. There are others that would say, no, you have to face the consequences. We're going to bring you to trial and blah, 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 blah. And you have to face your punishment like a man. And I think you could argue it both ways. And my own view is, I think that the author is trying to paint Shaul at the end of his life. I think, and the reason I think that is because it's bookended. At the beginning of his reign, he was the potential great king, taller and handsomer than everybody else. During his reign, he messed up right royally, literally. And at the end, he, as it were, it's almost like a Greek tragedy, isn't it? At the end, he comes good, as it were, and falls on his sword, and he shows that he's brave.
Like
on the other hand,
what'd you say, like a Hespit at the end of his life, showing him in the best lights.
Yeah, maybe may well be that. On the other hand, you know, there was a chap called Chaim Walder. Remember him?
Yes.
Chaim Walder was a renowned author of help books for kids speak, for children and children in difficulties, and he was like the guru of the Haredi world for young children with problems. Turned out that he was a pedo. And when it was all came out, he shot himself. And many people said, well, you know, Zemagialo, it serves him right. He deserved to be done in. Other people said, what a coward. He should have faced the music. And, you know, and some of the victims said that was not, you know, that was a coward's way out. So you can argue it both ways. I think it's a fascinating discussion, and I think there are points on both sides. Jeffrey, you wanted to say something.
It's just a point. I don't think it's possible to fire a bow and arrow from a chariot. These things didn't have springs. The ground wasn't paved. They would have been thrown all over the place. When you're riding a chariot, you've got to hang on for grim life. So there's no way you could fire a bow and arrow from a chariot. But what is interesting is they're both frightening. If you're facing up to a barrage of arrows and you're facing up to charging chariots with long spears, it's frightening. It's, you know, now we know that from past readings that Saul was scared. He had all sorts of reasons for being scared. And I don't think it was just confined to Saul. I think people around him knew this. This Amalekite boy, he's obviously gone to do some looting. He sees the crown, he sees the things, he takes those, and of course he's going to go to David because he sees David as the successor.
Right, okay, let's stop there because we're coming to that in a minute. You're right, everything that you say is right, and I'm not overly bothered about the difference between the chariots on the one hand and the archers on the other hand, because they could both be correct. You know, as you say, they're both frightening, and we know that he was frightened. The spear thing, I think, is relevant because I think that the Amalekite used the spear because the spear is connected with Shaul, and it's connected with Shaul's antagonism towards David. Now let's go on. What other differences have we got? Well, yes, David Marks.
Yeah, can I just quote a couple of things from Art Scroll, please? According to the account in Shmuel Aleph, Shaul committed suicide without outside intervention, while the young man claimed that Saul's attempt to kill himself failed, and that he summoned the lad who had just happened to be passing to complete the task. Radak and the Abarbanel comment that either the young man's account was truthful, and it just fills in the details that were left out in Shmuel Aleph, or he was lying, and this is the point you've made, in the expectation that by taking credit for the death of David's archenemy, he'd be handsomely rewarded by the new king.
Right, that's exactly the point that I'm making.
Yeah.
And we're going to come to that in detail now.
Have a look, there's a third thought to consider.
Okay, before you tell us the third thought, I want to go into the detail of the second thought. Okay?
Third thought.
Thought, yeah.
Thought.
Thought, as in think, right?
No, thought. Macaw.
Oh, source. Okay, sorry, the third source. Okay, go on, tell us the third source then.
Okay, Divrei Hayamim chapter 10, which interestingly follows the account.
Divrei Hayamim Aleph or Bet?
Aleph.
Chapter 10, yes, go on.
So the account there is almost a carbon copy of what we saw in Shmuel Aleph.
Yeah, there it is.
No
verses 3, 4, and 5. There you go on the screen, Jeffrey. Please read that for us.
And crucially, verses 13 and 14.
Okay, let's read 3, 4, and 5 first, and then we'll go down the page.
And the battle bore heavily on Saul, and the archers discovered him, and he was terrified of the archers. And Saul said to his weapon bearer, "Draw your sword and pierce me with it, lest these uncircumcised ones come upon me and make a mockery of me." But his weapon bearer was unwilling, for he feared greatly. And Saul took the sword and fell upon it. And his weapon bearer saw that Saul had died, and he too fell upon the sword and died.
That, as David said, is almost a word-for-word copy of Shmuel Aleph chapter 31. Okay, so now then, 13 and 14.
And Saul died because of the treachery that he had committed against the Lord. concerning the word of the Lord that he did not keep, and also because he inquired of the dead spirit. And he did not inquire of the Lord, and he slew him and transferred the kingdom to David, the son of Yishai.
Okay. What's the relevance of those two last psukim, David?
Well, the real reason for why the kingship was taken away from him, which isn't specified in Shmuel Aleph or Bet.
It's specified in Shmuel Aleph in a number of places, isn't it? Not
but
actually
not as,
at the
not
end.
as in your face as this.
Well, if we go back to Shmuel 29, Shmuel Aleph 29, with the witch of Endor chapter, Shmuel says it very clearly, doesn't he?
Yeah, but that's in a dream or in a prophecy.
Okay. All right, so it doesn't say it specifically in chapter 31. Okay, but you're right about that.
Here it's the author of Divrei Hayamim is making the comments.
Correct. So I think that's a support for my view that, one sec, I'll come to you in a sec, Paul. I think that's a support for my view that the lad, the Amnalekite lad, is lying. And the real truth is chapter 31 of Shmuel Aleph and chapter 10 of Divrei Hayamim Aleph. And the whole reason that this kid is doing all of this is to ingratiate himself to David in the hope of a reward. And we'll come in a sec, once we've been to Paul, we'll come into that and a bit more detail now. Yes, Paul?
Seems a bit of a catch-22 for that latter quote from Divrei Hayamim. He died because he didn't ask the Lord, he asked the Witch of Endor. But in fact, he asked the Witch of Endor because all the other means of communication were actually closed off from him. So he couldn't have asked him.
I agree. I think that's a bit unfair. But I mean, I think it's fair to say that he was punished for invoking the dead, because you're not allowed to do that. But then to say you didn't inquire of the Lord, that's not fair, because he did, didn't he? He tried with the Urim V'Tumim, didn't get an answer. He tried with a dream, didn't get an answer. There was a third way he tried as well. There were three things he tried. What was the third one?
Kohanim.
Again, Hannah?
Kohanim.
Well, that was the Urim V'Tumim, wasn't it? He went to the Urim V'Tumim. He went to he tried to have a sleep. And what was the other one? We'll have to find it. Again?
Went to his Navi, his prophet.
The Navi, yes, that's right. The Navi. Very good. Yeah.
But anyway, the logic doesn't follow. They said one of the reasons he was killed is because he asked of the dead, but that just doesn't make any sense. Because otherwise, are you implying that if he hadn't asked the Witch of Endor, he wouldn't have died?
No, I think it's an also. Have a look at that word there. V'gam, and also. We all know, don't we, that the reason that he was killed and had we know the reason that he lost the kingship was because of Amalek, right? He didn't finish off Agag. And that's the treachery that he had committed against the Lord concerning the word of the Lord that he did not keep. That's clearly a reference to Amalek. And also, while we're at it, I think we have this concept in English law. We'll take into account all sorts of other things that you've done wrong and lump them all together. And also because he's inquired of the dead spirit. I agree with you, Michael. If it had just said that, that would be a difficulty. But the main reason has got to be the first one there, and that's the Amalek. I agree with Paul that verse 14 is difficult. It's almost as if Divrei Hayamim is sort of saying, well, these are all the reasons why you're a no good Saul, and he's just laying into all the things he did wrong. He didn't do it right with Amalek, and then he went to inquire of a dead spirit, and he didn't inquire of the Lord. And he was just no good, and Hashem killed him. Yes, David Marks.
Yeah. There's a midrash in Vayikra Rabbah that says that he was killed for 5 specific sins. Most of them we've mentioned, but just to go through the wiping out of the Kohanim in Nov, Agag.
That's a big one.
The third one was not waiting for 7 days for Shmuel, the witch of Endor, and the time when Shaul ordered the Kohen to refrain from consulting the Urim and Thummim in chapter 4 of Shmuel Aleph.
I'd forgotten about that. So that, Paul, may be what he's referring to, and he did not inquire of the Lord. Not necessarily the ones where you correctly pointed out he did and didn't get an answer. I'd forgotten about that one. Yes, that's very important. Okay, that's interesting. So all of those 5 things we are very familiar with, aren't we? Because we've learned Shmuel earlier. You can't hear me anymore. Okay.
Count's gone again.
Okay, we'll just hang on a minute. We'll just hang on. Barbara's got a bit of knitting, so you can wait a second till I'm back in the land of the talking. Any good? No, Michael's probably still a long way around. You can't hear me. Oh dear. What are we going to do with this thing? It's a real nuisance. Right, we're okay. Okay, so all of those 5 things we are familiar with from our learning of Shmuel Aleph. So let's go back to Shmuel Bet. Yes, Jeffrey?
Sorry to interrupt. The Amalekite has no credibility whatsoever.
We're coming to him now. We're going to talk about the Amalekite now. We're going right into him now. He doesn't have any credibility, and David is not having any of it. So he says to him, he told him what happens, and he said to me, right, verse 7, Jeffrey, on the screen, chapter 1, if you want to do it in your book, chapter 1 of Shmuel Bet, verse 7.
He turned around and saw me. He called out to me, and I answered, "Here I am." He asked me,
Stop. Vayifen acharav vayireni vayikra elav va'omar hineni. See that word hineni, translated as "here I am." Where have you heard that word before?
Hineni, isn't that Moses who said Hineni?
Okay, well, let's.
The Akedah.
Abraham at the Akedah.
Right.
Cain and
Abraham
Abel.
at the Akedah.
Cain and Abel.
It's in lots of places. Most of you are right. It's in lots of places. And what does it mean?
I'm here. I'm present.
I am ready to do whatever you want, HaKadosh Baruch Hu.
Correct. Hineni means not just I am present. It means I am here, ready, and waiting for your instructions, and I will do whatever it is that you ask me to do. Hineni is, and that's the one that is the most famous, and the one that I was thinking of was the Akedah that you quite rightly said. He says, Abraham, Hineni, here I am. I'm ready to do whatever it is that you want. And by using this expression, what is this lad saying? He's saying he turned round behind him and he saw me and he called to me. Who called to who? Shaul called to this fellow, and this fellow said, "Yes, your majesty, here I am. I will do whatever you want." Implying to David what? That he is a loyal subject to the king. And the only reason that he killed the king in the next pasuk is because the king told him to do it. Hineni tells the reader that this fellow, and this is what he wants the listener to believe, that he is a loyal subject. And he says, "Here I am." And verse 8, Jeffrey.
He asked me, Who are you?
Who are you?
And I told him, I am an Amalekite. Then he said, "Stand up over me and put an end to my life, for the throes of death have gripped me while my soul is still within me."
Okay, stop there. Why do you think we've got verse 8 there? What does remember that what's going on here? What's going on here is that this fellow is telling David what happened. Why would you, if you were him, why would you recount verse 8? You would go on from verse 7 to verse 9, surely. You'd say, and he turned round behind him, and he saw me, and he called me, and I said, here I am, your majesty. And he said to me, stand over me now and put me to death because of blah, blah, blah. Why is verse 8 there, which tells him, who are you? And I'm an Amalekite. What difference does it make who he is? He asked him to kill him. Yes, Philip.
Is it possible, I mean, it's probable that the Amalekites and the Philistines were allies. And that's why he announced it to him, because he was going to kill him anyway. And he must have, and I think that he did kill him. And I think that the story in the Bible, for some reason, in the Tanakh, has been changed.
Well, okay. I'm not surprised that you think that, Philip, because that is consistent.
But he said, Johnny,
with you.
Consistent with what?
With your 1 second, Anita. It's okay. Consistent with your conspiracy theories that you always have. But I don't agree with it. I think he's telling lies. I think he's telling lies, and I wonder why we've got verse 8 in there. Anita, what have you got to say about it?
Well, he said earlier he wanted to be killed because he didn't want the uncircumcised to kill him and mock him, you know. So that's why he's asking, who are you? Maybe.
All right. So you think that well, what difference does it make who it is? If he just said he's a Philistine? 1 second, Philip.
Sorry.
1 second, Philip. What difference was it make if he'd have said he was a Philistine or an Amalekite? What difference does it is? He says, who cares? Who cares? Just kill me. Who cares?
Saul most probably didn't even ask the question. If he was in agony or everything else, why would he ask that particular question?
All right, very good, Michael. Very good. So the guy's made that up as well. Why would he do that?
Embellish his story.
Embellish his story in good. In what way?
Make it sound more realistic.
I think like this. Tell me what you think. This is my own nonsense, so you can feel free to disagree with it. I think that Michael is right that this bit was put in by the Amalekite because he's trying to embellish a story, and there's a certain irony, is there not, that an Amalekite would be the one that kills Shaul. When Shaul, we know, is punished and is taken, the least we know is that the kingdom was taken away from him because of his failure to sort out Amalek. There's a sort of an irony and a sort of closing of the circle in a way that an Amalekite should be the one to finish off Shaul. There's almost a sort of, I don't know, delicious irony of it. I don't think it really happened. I think it's part of the embellishment that Michael is talking about, because I don't think it's relevant. Who cares who's going to kill him? The only other thing I thought about was, and then I've dismissed it, and I'll tell you why I dismissed it. The only other thing I thought about is whether Shaul doesn't want to be killed by one of his own men and make a Jew kill him. But then he says to the armor bearer, who probably was a Jew, that he should kill him. So I don't know. Hannah.
What came into my head was that we've had an Amalekite come to David before, after Ziklag, after they came and they took away all the women and children and everything. It was an Amalekite slave that came to him and said, I'll tell you where they are if you don't give me back to my master or kill me. And maybe it's got some connection to reminding David that Amalekites have helped him before or have done something positive for David before.
Okay, I like the idea, but it's a bit thin, because how did this Amalekite help him? He helped him get back his wife and children, who the Amalekites had kidnapped in the first place. So
No,
unless you want to say, which is a little bit stretched, I think, unless you want to say it's the same Amalekite, which I don't.
Well, no, I'm sorry, I'm wrong. It was an Egyptian youth, the slave of Amalekite.
Ah, right. Okay. So that you're right.
I'm sorry,
okay,
I was incorrect.
Okay, so we'll dismiss that bit. Right. Okay, so that's what I think. I think that he's made it all up, and it's a bit of delicious irony that that an Amalekite would kill Shaul, because Shaul was guilty, of course, with the Amalek. Let's go on a little bit more. And so he says to him, "Stand over me and put me to death, for this Shavetz is gripped me." And as we said before, we've got various different descriptions. The art scroll has explicitly said, even though it doesn't, I don't know what the word Shavetz, whether it means a death throw. All the other translations seem to translate it as a convulsion, a seizure of some sort.
Shavatz is a heart attack, Johnny. Shavatz in modern day Hebrew is a heart attack.
I thought Hatkafat Lev was a heart
attack.
Yes,
Hatkafat Lev, but there's a short term for it. Shavatz is a heart attack.
I think what's an epileptic fit in Hebrew?
It just says it's a stroke. I've just looked it up.
Machalat Nefila, the falling illness, it's called.
Okay, so what does Shavetz mean, Barbara? Did you look that up?
I've just looked it up on Google. It says stroke.
Okay, so Shavetz means a stroke. All right.
No, it's also a heart attack. I know.
All right. We don't know what it means here in biblical Hebrew. I'm wondering, David, maybe you can help us if you've got a concordancia handy. Does that word come anywhere? Have a look for us, if you will. If that word Shavetz comes anywhere else in Tanakh, David will look that up for us while I'm talking. We're nearly out of time, but so I think we can understand it. What he is trying to say, whether it actually means that or not, what he's trying to say is that Shaul was dying, and I finished him off. And I finished him off because he asked me to do so. And I stood over him. Verse 10, Jeffrey.
So I stood over him and ended his life, for I knew that he would not survive after he had fallen on his sword. In brackets. I then took the crown that was on his head and the bracelet that was on his arm and brought them here to my lord.
Stop that. Stop there.
Johnny,
so
is it possible?
One second. You have to wait a second, Philip. Wait. Come back to you in a sec.
Yeah.
So he says we've spoken about the word niflo after his fall. Jeffrey said after his fall on his sword. Did you say that on his sword is in brackets, Jeffrey?
It is in brackets.
Okay, that's helpful. So we've discussed that a little bit already. And then what's interesting is that the lad then goes on almost without taking a breath. He's just said, I killed the king. Oh, and then, by the way, I took his crown and his bracelet and I brought them to you. It's almost as if killing the king was like a nothing. And the most important thing that he wants to tell David is that this fellow, has brought in the crown and the bracelet, obviously in the expectation of a reward.
It would have been better if they just why didn't you just nick the crown and the crown and the sword? He would have made it more. The crown presumably was very valuable. He would have been better off not even bothering to go to David.
Well, where are you going to fence the king's crown, Michael? You can't go down the pub and say, I've got the crown jewel. Imagine you go into the Tower of London and you nick the crown jewels. Who are you going to sell them to?
You break it down. You sell the little bits in the diamonds or the
private collector
individually.
Well, maybe there weren't those kind. Maybe he didn't have that sort of those connections. Yeah. Philip,
Johnny, is it possible that it's not written, but that Shaul might have first have been hit by an arrow, one of the thousands of arrows that were being fired on them?
Well, again, you're just making it up as you go along. It doesn't say that anywhere. So,
No,
I mean,
it doesn't.
yeah,
It doesn't.
of
But there's
course
a
it's
lot
possible.
There's a lot of stuff that's concealed here.
Which is why I said you were a conspiracy theorist, because you make up your own theories. Right, we're out of time. We are now at the point. We've done verse 10, and we have said that this fellow is at best embellished the story, at worst made the whole thing up in order to ingratiate himself with David and to get a reward. If you don't want to know what happens, don't read on, but we will see what David's response is to this fellow's attempts at ingratiation, and we'll see what kind of reward David gives him for next week. Any questions on what we've done today? Which I'll just summarize. We looked at the comparison between chapter 31 of Shmuel Aleph and chapter 1 of Shmuel Bet, and David brought us a support from Divrei Hayamim as well. We've come to a sort of agreement that, except for Philip, who thinks that everything is only half a story and he's got his own Tanakh, everybody else is in the agreement that this fellow is at best making it up, at best embellishing it, and at worst making the whole thing up. We're going to see how David deals with that next week. Any questions so far today? We've got a couple of chats here. What does it say? Can you make the text a little bigger? Oh, sorry. Yes, I'll try and do that for next week. All right. I wish you all a
the word Johnny doesn't appear anywhere else in Tanakh. The closest is in Parashat Pekudei, to do with embroidery. V'shibatzta m'shubatzim zahav.
How interesting. Okay, I don't know what made me ask you to do that, but that was a good question to get you to do. Thank you for that, David.
Yeah, the translation he gives here for Shabbat is either cramp or giddiness.
Wow, it's a bit. That's not so terrible. But it's not a death throw, that is it?
In Yiddish, you say "meshibet mitzach," so he's shaking like from a fever. "Meshibet mitzach," so must be the same root.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Okay, so we've probably got a little bit more to delve into on that word. To be honest, I'll do a little bit more digging myself. But he's not been explicit, has he, by using that word? Very interesting. Okay, let's see what we can make of that. Homework. Anybody that can come up with anything interesting that's to do with that word shavet. Philip will come up with a whole new Tanakh for us based on that word. Let's see what happens. Okay, Shavua Tov, everyone. Shavua Tov.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Goodbye.